Trump has been canceling a whole bunch of appearances on the trail, but he has said he's going to do the Rogan show. And this is fascinating on a number of fronts, one of which is that he is going to be speaking largely to the converted. The AEI polled voters who have a favorable opinion of Rogan, which I guess is their stand-in for Rogan listeners, and 72% of them also have a favorable opinion of Trump. And Harris is in the teens in the very same poll. So Trump will be speaking to largely the converted, which doesn't mean it's a waste of his time. Like, he can try to convince those people to make sure they vote. These are probably many of them sporadic voters, but he also can maybe have some viral clips that other people see elsewhere. Now, the question is, will Harris do Rogan? I think she will do it if Rogan will let her do it, even though there are very few voters who listen to Rogan who like Harris. But given it's such a big audience, it's like, I think 11 million or something regular listeners, that's a huge opportunity. But also, the viral clips that can come from a Harris appearance could help her. They obviously could also hurt her, so there is a risk to it. But I think given how close this race is, she can't turn down any big audiences, which is why she did this town hall meeting yesterday with CNN. Now, this was largely a run-of-the-mill appearance from Harris. There wasn't that much she said that was that interesting. But there was one moment that I think speaks to what she thinks her best closing argument is. Let's go to this clip.
And he's going to sit there unstable, unhinged, plotting his revenge, plotting his retribution, creating an enemies list. I'm going to tell you, my list will be a list of how I address and continue to address the issues that you all are raising this afternoon and evening. It will be a to-do list about how we can impact the American people and lift up the American people.
So this idea that an enemies list versus this idea of an enemies list versus a to-do list is kind of a contrast that she wants to show. And I'll get in a second to what we can glean from the ads and some of the research as to how these campaigns are going to close. But one other moment from the trail caught my attention. This is when Tucker Carlson appeared at the Turning Point event in Georgia yesterday.
If you allow your 2-year-old to smear the contents of his diapers on the wall of your living room, and you do nothing about it, if you allow your 14-year-old to light a joint at the breakfast table, if you allow your hormone-addled 15-year-old daughter to slam the door of her bedroom and give you the finger, you're gonna get more of it. And those kids are gonna wind up in rehab. It's not good for you, and it's not good for them. No. There has to be a point at which dad comes home. Yeah, that's right. Dad comes home. And he's pissed. Dad is pissed. He's not vengeful. He loves his children. Disobedient as they may be, he loves them. Because they're his children, they live in his house. But he's very disappointed in their behavior. And he's gonna have to let them know. He's gonna have to get to your room right now and think about what you did. And when dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now. And no, it's not gonna hurt me more than it hurts you. No, it's not. I'm not gonna lie. This is gonna hurt you a lot more than it hurts me. And you earned this. You're getting a vigorous spanking because you've been a bad girl. And it has to be this way. It has to be this way because it's true. And you're only gonna get better when you take responsibility for what you did. That's not said in the spirit of hate. It's not said in the spirit of vengeance or bigotry. Far from it. It's said in the spirit of justice, which is the purest and best thing there is. And without it, things fall apart.
So a few things about this. It is fascinating that the closing argument from Tucker Carlson is it's going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt me. If the metaphor here is that the girl is the American public, it's going to hurt the American public more than it's going to hurt me or hurt Trump. Weird, obviously. it seems like he has no problem leaning into the gender gap here. The choice of dad's coming home, it's a little girl. It's just weird. That whole thing is a strange metaphor. Obviously, his audience obviously loved it, and it's hard to say what turns people out in the Trump base. But if I were the Harris team, I'd be clipping that and getting that all over the place, because I'm not sure most normal people in my life, whether you're a Trump supporter, a Harris supporter, or not voting at all, are going to look at that clip and say, "Oh yeah, that's the team I want to ride for." Now, the other part of this is that it reminds me of during the sort of renaissance Harris had a couple months ago when she first jumped into the race. The idea was, the frame was that Republicans, Trump people are weird. And that we need some sense of normality. They've moved off of that, but I've noticed recently that they've kind of reclaimed it and they've upgraded it a certain amount. Like when Obama was in Michigan, he was playing up things like Trump doing the McDonald's stunt and stuff like that to kind of upgrade the weird frame. I sense that you might see a little bit of a comeback there. It's also just some of the examples here, like a kid smoking a joint at the breakfast table, or and if it's smearing their feces on the walls, it's like, I don't know what world they're living in. And also the idea that the value at home is justice, right? Like with parents, like I don't know too many parents who are like, you know what I need in my house? I need justice, right? You don't think of your home that way. You think of teaching your kids lessons, right and wrong, how to do the right thing, making them better people. I'm not sure you're bragging about it hurting your kid more than it hurts you out of a sense of justice. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a parent. You parents out there, I'll leave it up to you to decide. Now, one piece here that is really interesting when we talk about closing arguments is that this organization called Blueprint tested closing arguments for the Democrats and which would be the most effective, right? That was the question they asked. And the number one testing message for Harris in the closing stretch is something along the lines of Trump's former cabinet, the people closest to him don't trust him. He will have a different team next time around of people who are more sycophantic, who are going to be yes people, and it's going to play into Trump's worst instincts, which are getting worse because he's getting older and more unencumbered. That is the message that by far tested the best. I mention this because, number one, you see in some of the Harris appearances and ads that they're playing into that. Like there's a big Harris ad that they've been investing heavily in that basically makes exactly that point. But second, obviously, a big story this week came out of The Atlantic with Jonah Goldberg that, among other things, quoted Trump's former chief of staff, his longest serving chief of staff, John Kelly, who had a lot to say about Trump. I'm sure you've heard about it by now. He called Trump a fascist, said that Trump said he wanted generals like Hitler had. And those are the things that got headlines. But I implore you, no matter what your politics are, to read the whole story, because there's a whole lot in there. And I think what happens here is we play whack-a-mole with these kinds of anecdotes, right? And I remember previously when John Kelly, like there was reporting out there from, I think, Peter Baker in the New York Times and others that suggested that Kelly had a lot of negative things to say about Trump. A lot of the people in Trump's circle were saying, like he's not on the record. They, these are all anonymous quotes or second source reporting. Well, now Kelly went on the record. There are audio recordings of him saying a lot of these things. And now they're saying, well, this is old news. Well, when it was new news before, you were saying it wasn't on the record. Now it's on the record. It's kind of like you're playing whack-a-mole with these different explanations as to why Trump isn't who he says he is. When you read this piece, you have direct quotes from Trump talking about the military, talking about John McCain. You have multiple sources on the record like John Kelly who are talking about what Trump said to them. Right? You don't have to take John Kelly's word for it. You can talk about Mike Pence's vice president. You can talk about Esper, his secretary of defense, Jim Mattis, his secretary of defense, John Bolton, his national security advisor. And you should read it. You can come to your own conclusions about this. Obviously, you vote for whoever you want to vote for. But the one thing I ask is stop gaslighting about this kind of stuff. You could say this doesn't sway your vote. You care about other things. But what really bothers me is when people in my life are like, this didn't happen. When it's like obviously true, when Trump is saying things that line up with what his most senior advisors are saying about him, and these are military people, often very conservative people. John Bolton is as conservative in the national security establishment as they get. John Kelly served this country. There's no evidence that he's some kind of liberal Democrat, right? He served in the administration. Mike Pence is as conservative as they get, right? What I ask is to stop gaslighting. You could say this isn't going to sway your vote, but read the piece, make up your own mind. What I do not want to hear anymore is that these things didn't happen, right? Because clearly most of what they wrote happened. And you could just focus on what Trump says himself, and I think it makes the point for him. Now, the second most tested issue for Democrats messaging is about abortion, as you'd imagine. So you could see them closing on this. People next to Trump don't trust him. He's going to be unencumbered. He's going to be more unhinged, plus abortion. Now, what is the GOP closing argument going to be? Well, there's this really interesting piece from Mark Caputo in Bulwark that looks at GOP ads. And they showed that GOP ads mentioning Kamala and trans prisoners is number one in TV ads that the GOP has put money behind. And the economy is number 5, which I find surprising. Sam Stein tweeted, since President Joe Biden left the race in July 2021, Republicans have spent about $120 million on ads attacking their Democratic rivals over trans issues. Trump has run 3 ads that each feature a video of Harris in 2019, boasting about her advocacy as California Attorney General for the surgeries for the incarcerated. Democratic strategist Liz Smith said, worth noting that this approach fell completely flat in the midterms. The GOP went all in on this playbook in states like Michigan and got their clocks cleaned. But if you read Caputo's reporting in the Bulwark, he quotes a bunch of people, including people close to Trump, who seem to think this is working for them. Trump's pollster, John McLaughlin, said the following. He said, in the character contrast, these cultural issues become symbols of those characters. They don't have to be the top issue, but they have to make values connection with the majority of voters, and this is symbolic of why her character doesn't connect with the majority of voters. Steve Shale, who runs a pro-Harris super PAC called Unite the Country, who had gone up against Susie Wiles, sort of the campaign guru for Trump, said the following. He said, I've been up against the Susie playbook and learned how it works the hard way. It's pretty simple. Drive up the negatives on the opponent to the point that the choice comes down to one thing that her candidate has an advantage on, in this case, the economy. I suspect that's what's going on here with their strategy, driving Harris's negatives down into the barrel with Trump, and that's the real thing my side has to guard against. And you're seeing some of this. The Lincoln Project has a response ad that I think they're putting some money behind that points out that actually under the federal prison system in 2019 under Trump, they were allowing green-lighting these surgeries, and the Trump ad says they, meaning Democrats, are for they, them. It's kind of play on the sort of trans pronoun language. The Lincoln Project spins that back and says Trump is for he, him, meaning he's for himself, which I thought was a clever turn of phrase. Will it matter? Who the heck knows? But that is what's going on in the ad battles. Let's talk quickly about early vote. The top line picture of early vote is the following. Starting with the Democrats, where they can feel pretty good. They can feel really good so far about Michigan. Nearly 60% of all registered likely Democratic voters with frequent voting histories have requested a ballot in Michigan, compared to 33% of frequent likely GOP voters. And I'm quoting from Patrick Hsu from America Votes. He said, meanwhile, nearly half of voters with mid-range scores and frequent voting histories have requested a ballot. He said nearly a quarter of registered infrequent or sporadic voters that have played a significant role in driving wins in the past few cycles have requested a ballot. And he goes on to say that basically the sporadic voters are leaning way more heavily Democratic than Republican, and the turnout for Democrats has been much higher than for Republicans, and the gender split is heavily in favor of women. That is the story out of Michigan. Out of Pennsylvania, I would say it's modestly good news for Democrats so far. They have something like a 350,000 vote advantage over Republicans as of yesterday, but that is not as big as a percentage. I think they were 40+% higher than Republicans in 2020, whereas now they're 30+% right now. It's not as big of an advantage in 2020, which you wouldn't expect for reasons I've mentioned on other podcasts. But so I say, and they're trying to get to a 500,000 plus vote, quote unquote, firewall by election day. A lot of observers say they might get there. Given that it's not traditional early vote in Pennsylvania, I don't glean too many lessons from Pennsylvania, because if you look at other states where Republicans have been dramatically outperforming their 2020 early vote and absentee and mail-in, is when there's in-person early vote. That seems to be the preferred method by Republicans, but modestly good news in Pennsylvania. So Michigan, Pennsylvania looking decent for Democrats. Where is it looking good for Republicans? Nevada. The Republicans maintain a lead in ballots cast in Nevada, which is something you do not see at this phase in the cycle. They are taking advantage of in-person early vote to a large extent. And Ralston, who I've mentioned before, who's the Nevada data guru, said the following based on what he knows so far. He said, if Harris and Trump tie with indies statewide and hold 90% of their bases, Trump would win the state by 10,000. So tie with indies, Trump would win the state by 10,000. Even if Harris were to win indies by 10 points right now and they both hold their bases at 90%, she loses by 2,000 votes. This is because the 15 rural counties are turning out in larger than usual numbers, except for a couple. They're all or near 20% and somewhere upwards of 25%. And the Dems are losing by almost 3-1 in rural Nevada. Can the rurals keep this up? Will Clark Mail begin to help Democrats catch up? So his assumption is if these trends hold, which is a big if, and Republicans continue to see massive turnout in rural areas, Harris would have to win independents by more than 10 points. I don't think that's the 10 points is anywhere in the vicinity. The last poll I saw out of Nevada is the AARP poll, which has Trump leading among independents 46-39. So not only is she not winning independents by 10, she's losing independents in the most recent poll that we saw. So based on what Ralston said and based on that poll, things are not looking great in the state of Nevada. Arizona has similar numbers. Republicans, the early vote numbers are looking good in Arizona for them. North Carolina, it's been going back and forth. The state has flipped back and forth between more Democratic votes cast versus more Republican votes cast. At the moment, there are more Republicans votes cast than Democratic votes cast, again, driven by in-person early vote. We'll see when the weekend comes. Democrats tend to do better on the weekends, in part because of polling availability, something I talked about on the podcast the other day. Georgia also seems to be trending fairly good for Republicans. If you rank, I think there's like 160 plus counties in Georgia. If you rank the top counties in terms of voter turnout so far, you have to get to number 40 something, I think, to get to a county where it's a Democratic majority county. Now, one could say that that doesn't tell you everything because Democratic counties, majority counties, are big counties. So if big Democratic counties are in the 40s out of 100 something, that means that they're above average. You also can look at the white voter skew. It's very slightly ahead of where it normally is. So it's a slightly more white electorate than it is in the early vote. People like Michael McDonald at the University of Florida say wait until the Souls to the Polls initiatives, and when the younger voters turn out, which happens later in the cycles, that might pull back the white percentage. We'll see. But again, Pennsylvania, Michigan, looking decent for Democrats. North Carolina, kind of a mixed bag, slightly trending for Republicans. Georgia, Arizona, definitely Nevada, looking pretty good for Republicans right now. That is what the early vote tells us. Obviously, it's not dispositive. It just tells you about the sequencing of votes in many cases. I would say Nevada might be the one exception where we might start to get into concrete information as to how that election is going to play out. But it just tells you who has the most work to do on election day. Pennsylvania, Republicans have a lot of work to do. Michigan, Republicans have a lot of work to do. In Nevada, Arizona, maybe Georgia, Democrats have a ton of work to do through election day.